Zen, Charlie O'Hara here. 436-1212 is the number to call. Thanks for being here on this Wednesday morning.
Sure.
We appreciate it. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
We do have some callers on the line who are ready to talk to you, Charlie, so go ahead. Caller, what's your question for us this morning? Go ahead, caller. What's your question for us?
Does a valid city license, does a valid city ordinance have to be signed by the mayor and clerk and notarized, and copies of it? I have seen copies, but no signed by the mayor or no notarized.
Well, if you're talking about an ordinance, I think it would have to be. Usually the actual signed copy would be down at the city hall. So even though sometimes copies exist that are not signed, and the way to check that would be to go to City Hall, ask the clerk at City Hall if they have a signed original or a signed copy that you can see, so you can check that out. Before I go to that conclusion, I think I'd go check that out. A lot of times as attorneys we draw things up and they get out and they're not signed, and they get out even though the originals are signed. So I think I'd check that. If it's not signed, it would be a kind of a big point.
Is that something that can just get overlooked?
Well, I guess anything can get overlooked. It would seem that since usually the council would have to vote on that, you would think that everybody would sign it, and that's why they have a legal department there to make sure all those things are done. But to say mistakes can happen, and sometimes they do.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie. We do have another caller on the line. Go ahead, caller. What's your question for us? Go ahead, caller. What's your question for us this morning?
Hi. I just wanted to find out if someone got a judgment against you and you filed bankruptcy, does it go away?
Well, it kind of depends on the judgment. Some judgments do, some judgments do not. If it's an intentional act, if you intentionally do something to somebody and intentionally do that and then try to get rid of it with bankruptcy, then you have to go to the bankruptcy court and determine whether that should be discharged or not. So there's not a clear answer to that. Some judgments would go away and some debts do go away, but it depends on each one of those. So I can't give you a clear answer now. You'd probably ought to check with an attorney or some legal advisor.
Okay, good place to start then.
Yes.
All right, we do have another caller on the line for you. Go ahead, caller. What's your question for Charlie this morning?
I want to know if there's something that could be done to a doctor that did not inform a patient that he was putting a device on the inside of them.
Well, obviously a doctor should inform his patients what he's doing to them, especially when he's operating on them. If he's putting something inside of them and doesn't tell them about that, I think he should do that. I don't know if the thing that was put in there is defective, or if it shouldn't have been put in there, or there should have been consent from the patient and it's hurting the patient, then there might be a lawsuit. If it's actually doing well and doing what it's supposed to do, then there probably would not be much of a lawsuit. But I think a doctor should inform their patient of what devices they're putting inside them.
Or if there was some sort of a recall on some sort of the object or device that was put inside as well.
Well, if there's a recall, I think the doctor ought to inform them. Also, the company ought to inform them. There ought to be some real things done if there's some information, probably a new surgery. If something's been recalled, that'd be a very serious thing.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, viewers. We appreciate your calls. We do have one more on the line for us. We have time for one more. Go ahead, caller. What's your question this morning? All right, caller. What's your question for Charlie?
Oh, yeah. My question is about the seatbelt law here in Wichita. I was under the impression that it was a secondary law and you could not be pulled over for that. Is that the fact, or has it been changed?
It's been changed. Originally it was a law where you couldn't get pulled over for it. Now you can get pulled over for it. So if you don't have your seatbelt on, you can be stopped, and then everything happens from then. So you should wear your seatbelt. I don't know how anybody can tell if you're wearing a seatbelt if you're in an old vehicle, because you don't have a shoulder harness, but in the new vehicles you better have it on.
I was going to say they're doing that new campaign, click it or ticket, so buckle up.
That's right.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much for answering those callers' questions. We appreciate it. Good to see you.
Sure.